you doing?
I'm doing great, Steve. It's great. It's great to have you on. I've talked to great players, great coaches, administrators, but I haven't talked to any officials yet. And as an official, you did it just about as much as you can do. Well, first of all, you were a player, a good player, very good player for Stuart, now Justice. But you officiated many big high school games. But you did ACC for more than 20 years. You
Yep.
did some NCAA tournament games, and you've taught a lot of officials, and I guess you still run camps. So you've done quite a lot in officiating.
It's been a great run. I mean, it really has been. I've had a lot of success, but I've been very, very fortunate because I've had a lot of mentors and a lot of people that have helped me along. And I think that that's of critical importance for anybody. You never do things on your own or by yourself. You may think you do. You certainly have a responsibility when you go to officiate, for the responsibility for that game. But the reality is, it's a cumulative impact and effect by your crew as well as your teammates when I was playing.
I went on your website for your camp, and I saw like 500,000 Cardinal officials that work with you on your official camp. All my the people I worked with when I used to officiate.
Group of vagabonds.
That's right. So you guys weren't able to have a camp this year, but hopefully by next year you're back.
No, we've actually, we're affiliated with Paul and Eddie Webb with their team camp at Randolph-Macon, and as a result of the pandemic, we've actually missed 2 consecutive camps. So
is that right?
It's been very disappointing. But I mean, a lot of it is the teams that participate in that camp, come from Virginia. A lot of them come from Northern Virginia, and as a result of the restrictions that were placed upon coaches and the kids. They really couldn't field the camp. So we're really looking forward to next year. It should be great. And it really is. It's going to be interesting for us and great to get back in the saddle and be doing what we love to do, which is teach and try and help guys get better.
Yeah. I wish I would have had your camp when I was trying to get to the next level.
You do too.
Yeah, I guess so. Back then you just had it's on the job training, and you probably learn from some sage, get some sage advice from old timers. But we'll get to your officiating. On our Facebook group, I noticed yesterday you mentioned that Skeeter Swift had drop kicked a ball and won a game. Did you see that? Did you see that game?
Something that's funny. That was before my time, but I did see it on as you could figure at that point in time on a very grainy black and white film. I saw it on the news. And he literally, had just taken the ball in the backfield, drop kicked a 33-yard field goal. He was phenomenal, and I had even more of a relationship with Skeeter in that he was involved in so many different things, and he was such a personality. But I think Coach Wickline mentioned that he was a man among boys when he played, and he really was. It was like he was 5 or 6 years older than the guys he was playing against and with. And he just was a dominant force. But when I played youth baseball, he ended up coming back and umpiring. And I was a first baseman. And, the base umpire, you'd always establish that relationship with that base umpire and have a long conversation with him. And I looked at him and knew he looked familiar the first time I saw him. And I said, "Did you play around here?" And of course, I come to find out it was Skeeter, and I just started laughing. I said, he was always quite a personality, and we really developed a nice relationship based on the umpire first baseman situation too.
So is this during his breaks from East Tennessee State, or is this when he was in the ABA? He would officiate during the summer times.
Well, I think actually it was probably in the summer when he was playing in the ABA.
That's right. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, he came back. I think he played for the Pittsburgh Condors, if I'm not mistaken. Yeah. At least I remembered that from our relationship.
It's so funny because we think about pro athletes today, they make so much money, their off season is spent doing what they want to do, maybe investing. But back then, pro players made probably ABA 40, 50,000, 30, who knows? And they all had full-time employment, or at least things they did in the off season to make ends meet.
And he was looking to do something in the off season just to pick up some additional money. Sure.
Yeah, exactly. So Steve, did you grow up in the Bailey's Crossroad in the Stuart area there?
As a matter of fact, I did. Yeah. I mean, I was born at GW University Hospital. I mean, I'm a DC Metro guy. we moved when I was 10. My mom and dad moved over right near Bailey's School. In fact, on the street right across from Bailey's Elementary School, which of course is between Bailey's Crossroads and Seven Corners. And there was a playground across the street. I moved there when I was 10. I'd actually been playing baseball from the time I was 6. But my first foray into basketball was those courts being across the street. And my dad had a leather Spalding Top Flight. I'll never forget this. And I said, I'd like to go out and shoot some. So we go out to shoot. And of course, we're playing on asphalt. So we tore the cover off of that ball, but I probably kept it and played with it for 4 or 5 years. It was a terrific ball. He'd gotten it as a gift and said he wasn't going to use it, so I could use it. But he took me out and kind of taught me a little bit about how to shoot. And my home, away from home, for the next 5, 6, 7 years was that basketball court. I was out there constantly. My mom used to joke. My mom had a whistle. She put her fingers in the side of her mouth and she'd call you to dinner that way. And she said, Steve, I couldn't see you, but I could hear the ball bouncing, so I knew you were there, because I used to stay out until after dark, and then she would call me in for dinner. And I was pretty dedicated to it as a youth, and ended up being a pretty good player.
Was the Bailey's Crossroad Community Center, was it built yet at that time?
No,
It wasn't. Okay.
no. This literally was just the elementary school was right there across the street. And as a matter of fact, I was an officer at the school when I was in 6th grade, and I petitioned the county to put additional hoops on the court. I had used it so much, and believe it or not, when I was in the 7th grade, I was out of school when I was going to Glasgow. They actually did construction and put the new hoops up. So I always thought that was funny.
And when you were coming up, when you started playing pickup ball, were the games integrated where you were? Because I know there are a lot of Black families in, of course, the Bailey's Crossroad areas.
They were, and of course that continued through Stuart. It was very interesting, because when I was growing up, both in baseball and basketball, we didn't think anything about it. I mean, it's just, those are the people you went to school with, those are your friends, and especially teammates, because your primary consideration was winning. And so I never really thought of it being about black and white when I was coming up as a kid. And of course we moved into Stuart, and Stuart had a big, there was a Black neighborhood right across Columbia Pike. And so, I played with Greg Williams, Terry Chase, David Pitts, played with Larry Hall, a lot of guys that were very good players, but we were just teammates. And so it was an interesting situation, very, very tough situation, to be honest with you, in 1969, when Reverend King was assassinated. It was incredibly tense. But at that time, I was a sophomore and I was playing on the team. Jim O'Brien was obviously the star of the team, but we had Black teammates on that. Jeremiah Marshall was playing, and Clarence Summers were playing on that particular team. And it was an incredibly tense and difficult time. We got through it, but as you remember, I mean, it was riding downtown, and it was just a very, very difficult time. But I felt good because of the fact that we had integrated the school and teammates, and it made me feel more comfortable and closer to them through what happened.
Was there ever any tension when you went and played teams? I know there wasn't that many schools in the western part of the county yet, but there was Fairfax, there was Annandale, there were schools that had no Black players, or very few, up until late 70s, maybe the 80s. Was there tension, especially in those early years, that you guys had?
Something, I don't remember specific situations. I remember we went and played TC, and TC was all Black, but never really thought about that. It was funny. I don't think more than the integrated aspect of things. I think the difficult part was when I went to Stuart, we played in the Northern District, and the old Northern District was so tough. I mean, we had Coach Jenkins and Woodson, Jim Warren was at Falls Church. We had Clay Estes at Annandale. Coach Wickline was at Thomas Jefferson. And each of those schools in there had branched off from another. There were natural rivalries. For example, Falls Church existed, and then Stuart was built. Stuart pulled from Falls Church. Jefferson was built, it pulled from Stuart. And the rivalries that we had, I mean, Coach Jenkins, the players and the teams that he had, you're beginning to think that it was a family affair. when you played him. He had the Oliverio brothers, 3 of them come through. Always, each of them in their own right was a great player. I played against John and TJ Pecoric. I played against the Michael twins. He always had great players. And if you go back, he had Jimmy Jukes, who was a great college football player and was a great football player, but a guy wasn't 6 feet tall, could jump out of the gym. Skip Brandon, Walter Hawkins. I mean, he just had so many great players. And so those matchups were always tough. I mean, I was trying to think back, and I don't think, even with Jim O'Brien, I don't think we ever beat Woodson. And I know they beat us in the district to keep us out of the region because, of course, it was a much tighter playoff format back then. But you look at those games and you look at those coaches and those teams, every single game was contested. It was tough and it was hard fought. So it was actually a good place to cut your teeth in terms of learning about the game and being competitive, though.
So that, Red was a young coach then. Did he have the same presence that he had? I was class of 84, and Red had this aura. He would just throw his arms up and the crowd would yell and the officials would, feel the pressure of the Woodson crowd. Did he have that aura about him?
Something I think he was building it at that time. I don't know. If I go out on a limb, he certainly didn't have the aura that he has, at this point, having a Hall of Fame career and being the coach and having the number of wins and championships that he won. He was building that legacy. But again, he'd already had, I think, 2 of the Oliverios had already come through. The Pecoric brothers were terrific players, and he had so many others. And it was the type of thing that you knew that it was a formidable, game every time you went up against Woodson. But that's not to slight the other teams in the district, because the Northern District was tough. We played against a guy named Alan Kendall at Falls Church. The guy was about 6'6". He had a tough time because Jim O'Brien always seemed to have his number, and we seemed to have Falls Church's number. But as soon as Jim graduated, Alan got even with us the following year because he was a year younger than Jim. And I think he put it on us a couple times that next year. So those were tough matchups. Coach Wickline, I used to think Coach Wickline must have spent an hour at the end of every practice shooting free throws. Because number one, I found out later, he wanted the game called relatively tight because that's the way that he was best. And I think he put those guys on the line at the end of practice every day and shot free throw after free throw after free throw. And he knew that in many situations in a close game was going to be the difference in the game. So I respected. There were always tough games against Jefferson. One in particular was one of my favorite games because I was not certainly a dominating presence as a sophomore, but I was fortunate enough to play on O'Brien's team. And Coach Wickline decided he was going to double and triple team Jim, who was bringing the ball up at 6'7". He was bringing the ball up across midcourt. And he decided he was going to double and triple team and not let him bring the ball past midcourt. I parked myself in the corner, and I think I had either 7 or 8 shots that I hit, which today, of course, would be threes, but they only counted for 2. But it was probably my best game as a sophomore, and we ended up winning the game. I think Jim had some ridiculous amount of points, 21 or 22 points in the first half, and Coach Wickline said that ain't happening in the second half. So the little sophomore slid into the corner and made some jumpers and was maybe an equalizer in that game. But it was a real memorable game for me as a sophomore because it was probably my best game when Jim was on the team.
Yeah. One thing that Coach Bob McKeag said about Jim O'Brien, I talked to Coach McKeag a few weeks ago. He said that O'Brien fed off the opposing crowd's cheers. Like I guess at UVA, they would yell "bozo, bozo" to him.
They sure did.
The more you yelled at him, the better he would play. Do you have a recollection of that?
He was very intense, and he was he was very slightly built, so teams tried to play him physical, but his physical skills and his agility at his size was really amazing. I mean, sometimes I can remember a number of times he would come down the lane and he would throw the ball up off the board. This is a long time ago. He would throw the ball up off the board and go get it and lay it in, as he was coming past the defense. The defense would give him up as soon as he gave the ball up, and he just continued onto the basket, throwing it off the board and then laying it in. And that was one of his signature moves. But he was a tremendous player. And of course, then, was a star at Maryland as well. And they had a heck of a team.
Did you have a good relationship with him? I mean, were you guys friends? Did you guys keep in touch?
Yeah, we did. As a matter of fact, I talked to a mutual friend, Tom Flanagan, who was actually the captain on that team in '69. And Tom said he saw Jim recently, and he's really struggling. Physically, he's having a tough time. I don't know whether it's a particular debilitating disease of some sort, but he said he's just really having a tough time, getting around. So
Sorry to hear that.
I feel bad for him. I told him to give him my respects if he talked to him. I think he does from time to time.
Well, one thing that Coach Wickline mentioned to me was that the Arlington schools seemed bigger at the time. They were city schools, whereas the Fairfax County schools seemed like country schools. Now, you came in, the county is really being built up right around the time you're in high school.
Yep.
So things are changing quickly. Was there that sense to you as well, like Wakefield and Washington were the big schools, and like Annandale were the country and the smaller schools?
Well, I think number one, they were big. And the second part is they had dominating programs. I mean, you go back and Mo Levin was the coach with the Hummer boys, the Hummer brothers at W&L. Maynard Haycock was the coach at Wakefield, and they had tremendous teams. And when you want to talk about battles, you remember they got that big old cavern gym at W&L. My dad used to officiate, and I would go to see those games as a kid, and it was unbelievable how intense it was. Especially those teams playing against one another. It was really something. So I think we always considered those the more established, bigger schools, and it was one of those things where I don't know that was a difference in terms of city and county, but you always knew that was a formidable opponent anytime you played those teams.
Right. Now, I think your senior year was 1970s. Is that correct?
It was 71.
71. Okay.
Yep.
I know your junior year, Edison won the region, and that was a surprise because I think the Arlington schools had dominated most of the 60s, but Edison won with Carl Hensley. Carl Hensley was the coach, and they had a guy named Steve Morris, and I had never heard of Steve Morris, but Coach McCaig said he was a captain at UVA along with him their senior year, and they had another guy, DeHaven, that was playing. Did you play against that Edison team?
Yep. Steve Morris was a terrific player. Pete DeHaven, a great player in his own right. They were really good. And of course, before that, Bob Lowe had played, and Bob Lowe ended up going to West Virginia and playing there. He was a terrific player. And Pat Toomey, who of course played for the Dallas Cowboys. Yeah. But they all went to Edison and played for Coach Hensley. But yeah, they were really good. That particular year, I think we played them early in the season in a non-conference game, and I don't think we played real well. They were tough, and of course, Coach Hensley was a great coach. Both was fortunate enough to play against him and also officiate, for him.
In your senior year, how far did you get your senior year?
Senior year was a tough year for us. It's interesting. Our head coach was Bob Martin, and he was a former Marine drill sergeant, and he ran the program that way. And I think in certain situations we were motivated, in others we weren't. I don't know that he got a universal praise from the people that came through that program when he was the head coach there. I always felt like we probably could have done better. And I don't know whether it was a mix of a little love and a little discipline, but I don't really ever think we always felt like we were more talented than our results. And in that particular year in 71, I think we played Annandale in the first round of the district and ended up getting beat. I don't think we were supposed to get beat, but we did. And it was a very disappointing end to the career. So, it was unfortunate. And that I think earlier that year, as a matter of fact, in the game at Annandale, I think I had I scored 30 points 2 or 3 times. Wow. And I had 30 against Annandale early in the year. And it was just a very disappointing night. I mean, we didn't play well as a team. I know I didn't play well personally. And Annandale brought it and brought it strong, and they just beat us. But it was kind of a tough end to a season that we had hoped. We really thought we had an opportunity to have a really good year. But we were about 500, I think. So we really didn't play as well as we thought we were.
Was that Harry Smith coaching at Annandale?
Harry was coaching at Annandale. He sure was. Yep.
Yeah, he was AD at Robinson when I was in. I guess Red had been his assistant a few years earlier. So did you notice the officials at all when you were in high school? Did you look at these guys?
Funny about that. Maybe because of my dad. My dad officiating as long as he did. I was so consumed about our team and what we were doing and the opponents. I never really paid a great deal of attention to the officials, which is sort of ironic considering that the shoe's on the other foot, and I became one. But no, I didn't really pay, and I don't remember everybody on the team being consumed by officiating either, and maybe that was a good thing.
Yeah. Was your father was he a good official? Did he take it as seriously as you took it?
Well, let me put it this way. Dad refereed for over 25 years. He was involved in administratively. He was involved for over 30 years as a commissioner. He also umpired softball. He was a great official, and more important than that, he was universally respected and loved. And it was one of those things that I didn't appreciate his reputation until I started officiating and saw the way the people that I really respected and thought were great officials appreciated him. And that also goes to the coaching ranks as well. He had great relationships with Coach Jenkins, great relationships, in particular with some of the top coaches, Bob Veldrin at Wakefield, Bobby Joe Smith at Marshall, Clay Estes, Don McCool, all respected Dad and held him in high regard. And he, of course, returned that favor as well. And I think that's why they had such a great relationship. But one of the things about the local association that you may or may not know is, and I don't think probably a lot of the coaches still are aware of this, is that every year we give out a Lifetime Achievement Award, which is the highest honor that Cardinal can give. And the name of the award is the Ralph Gordon Award. So people thought so much.
Yeah, I knew that.
Yeah.
I forgot he was your father.
Yeah, when he retired, I believe it was 78. He retired. They dedicated the award in his name, and they've given it every year. Can't wait to get back into that too, because we've obviously had a couple years off from that, and it'll be a very special year in the spring when we do that again. But yeah, he had an unbelievable reputation, and as I say, it took me to start officiating before I realized that whenever I went home, I would always be the second best official in the house, no matter what games I worked.
Yeah. Well, it's funny the way you describe your father as an official. I always, there are two types of officials. There are more, but there are two certain types you see a lot. You have Andy Griffith, who's a guy that has great relationships. He's got great judgment, and he's able to get himself out of tough situations because of the force of personality and the respect he gets. And then you have Barney Fife. He goes into a gym and he's going to blow his whistle. He's going to let you know he's in charge no matter what happens. And I always loved the Andy Griffith style, the guy that he's there for the long term. Everyone respects him. He's not perfect, but he's going to work his way through tough situations.
That, in all honesty, Julian, that was Dad. I mean, he was not one to give technical fouls. He tended to work with and speak with the coach and try and work through a specific problem. I mean, he missed calls just like everybody else, and he'd tell you that. Nobody's ever worked a perfect game. But I think people respected him, and certainly as his career went along, they really respected him. And though they challenged him, they knew that he was drawing a line. But again, he was not one to give technical fouls. He would work through problems and work through situations. And as I say, it was interesting both from the standpoint of his counterparts as well as those that came up behind him, the respect that he commanded. And it's interesting. If you don't mind, I'll share a story about Coach Wickline. Sure. He and my dad didn't see eye to eye. And I don't know what the process was for not having a guy come to your place as an official, but my dad was a commissioner. So he was the one that you were reporting to. It wasn't going to go through a third source, but Coach Wickline told Dad after one game, he says, Ralph, he said, I just can't win with you. And you have to understand that Dad was a let him play guy. I mean, he called the game loose. And it was interesting because as things developed, I think it was probably 5, 6, 7 years. Dad never worked Coach Wickline's games. Well, I started officiating. And the amazing thing was I was probably in between Andy Griffith and Barney Fife. I was one of those that, was going to toe the line because I was one of the young guys that wanted to make sure that I earned my keep and earned my way and earned respect. But by the same token, I like to believe that I would try and work through situations and talk to people and get them through it. Well, do you know that despite that situation, Coach Wickline and I worked many a game for him. He never held that against me, that he had a difference of opinion with my father. And
Mm.
I've always respected him so much for that, being able to see the difference and work through that. And as a result, I always felt like I had a good relationship with him, regardless of what happened with Dad. And I always tip my hat to Coach Wickline for that.
Well, while we're on this, and I want to get your college career in here as well. But while we're on that, are there coaches in the northern region that you had a difficult time seeing eye to eye with? Like for example, Michael Harris. He started yelling at me when I was parking my car when I entered the gym. I just could not, no matter what I do, he was mad at me. Are there guys that you just didn't get along with?
Well, from what I mean, from what I understand, they have to understand there was a real limited window for me in terms of there was only about 6 or 7 years that I officiated, in Northern Virginia. So it made it difficult. And my dad had an interesting way of breaking me in. When I first got on the varsity level, he tended to send me to the Commonwealth District. And I thought it was very interesting because I gained a level of acceptance there. I can't tell you how many Woodbridge Garfield games I had. And you remember the 2-tiered gyms at Woodbridge and Garfield? I'd come in halfway through the JV game and they were jammed. I mean, you couldn't get anywhere near the parking lot or the gym. Had some terrific battles. Don Brown was coaching for Woodbridge and Butch Farley was coaching at Garfield. And they were just absolutely knockdown, drag out battles. And somehow I kind of earned my keep and earned my way in those games. They allowed me to officiate despite the fact that I was young and I was relatively inexperienced. And I like to believe I cut my teeth on some very tough games down there. So that is where I spent a lot of time working those games. Now I worked games in Northern Virginia, but Coach McCool was a tough guy. I mean, there's no question about it. I mean, he was tough. Oddly enough, Coach Warren could be tough. But those guys, I never really had a specific problem. I know Charlie Thompson. Charlie had a reputation for flying off the handle, and I didn't really have a problem with Charlie. I'm not positive how many games I actually worked of his, but again, I was fortunate to go through that. I worked for about 7 or 8 years on the high school level, and then, that was probably what you're getting to, in terms of officiating. I was fortunate enough I worked my first state game. I started in 76, 77, graduated in 75 from Richmond, where I played a couple sports. I was a basketball and baseball player. I only played basketball for 2 years, but I played baseball for 4 and was lucky enough to play with Roger Hatcher. Roger played for Clint Hanna at Madison and played for Tom Christie in baseball. Both of them legends and both of them great people who both my dad and I had great relationships with. But Roger Hatcher played. I backed him up at first base when he pitched. He was 2 years ahead of me, but was fortunate to play 4 years of baseball and be a captain my senior year there. But I tore my knee up my senior year and had surgery right at the end of my senior year. Went across country with my girlfriend and my dog in September after I graduated. So I really had a full year. And then in 76, 77, one of my favorite stories is I went to my dad in the summer and I said, "Hey, I think I'd like to officiate. I know you've been doing it for a long time." And he said, "Oh, you would?" I said, "Yeah." I said, "How would I do that?" And he says, "Well, D. Cloninger is the interpreter." And there's this silence. I said, "Yeah, okay. So how do I get in touch with him?" And he looked at me dead in the eye and he said, "His number's in the book." And he turned around and walked away. And the point is this is what Dad was always about. He said, if you have a sincere interest in doing this, you'll do it on your own. You don't need my help. So I called D. I went through the classes. Fortunately, passed both the international test and the state test. And it was, the rest is kind of history. I went to Chantilly for a freshman scrimmage, my first game ever, and I was nervous as could be. I mean, I just was, it was the first time on the floor. We'd done all the rule stuff. I said, this is not really officiating. Getting on the floor is officiating. And the funny thing was I went to the Falls Church High School, the old one, for my second game. And all of a sudden, something in my head and probably in my heart clicked. And I knew this was something I really wanted to do. I just all of a sudden, after that first game, I felt more comfortable the second game, and it just kind of built from there. So I was lucky to realize that I had a passion for it. And somehow maybe a little bit of ability that I parlayed into a pretty decent career.
Yeah, well, it's a great career. So I started officiating just like 6 or 7 years later in Charlottesville, and I was in intramurals, and you just kind of learn as you go. But it's a great way to learn. And I was making $5 a game, so I was working all the time, thinking I was making a little bit of money. And then Lou Farina picked me up, and I started doing high school games out there.
Great
And
guy.
oh, he's a great guy. But I didn't go to any class. You didn't go to any training. They basically knew I knew the game, and then you learn a little bit about mechanics as you go. Like an old timer would like Richard Lakes. He would tell you something. Not that you should listen to everything Richard says, but he would tell you something during after a game that could help. Or little by little you would build how to officiate games, how to carry yourself. And then when I came to Cardinal, when I graduated and moved up here, there was more of a process with which to move officials from people that understand basketball to an official that you want to put on the floor at a regional game or whatever. So did you just kind of learn like I did on the job, and you picked up a little bit more at a time? Or
in the initial stages, the interpreter was your first contact. So Dee Cloninger was instrumental in terms of teaching me the game and then putting me out on the floor. But maybe because of my dad, there was several people, guys that were senior officials, that they would assign for rec ball games around me, not even working with me, but they'd stay and observe a half and then give me some critiques. So I was very fortunate in terms of getting feedback that way. I think it's completely transformed, and I think you're absolutely right. And I do think we do it in a much better fashion now, in that we've got structure, we've got camps, we've got observers, we run summer leagues. If you want to get better, there is a structure and an ability to be able to do that. What I really like is, if you're a young person, guy or girl, and you want to get better, I think one of the things that you need to do is you need to watch games, and you need to figure out who you like. You need to figure out who you think is somebody that you'd like to emulate, not imitate, but emulate. And I think you need to request from the local association getting a mentor and having somebody that will, address things as you see them, will respond to your phone calls, will answer questions about rule situations or specific situations that might occur during the course of the game that you're uncomfortable with. And that's what we do in Cardinal. I mean, there's no question about it. I mean, we have feedback everywhere. They do the STEP program in the summer. We've got Mike Preston, who is, an interpreter par excellence. I don't know of anybody who's better at what they do than Mike Preston. He combines the rules with the film and video, shows you plays, and really gets you acclimated to the game that you're going to have an opportunity to work. I think Mike does a great job. Adam Brick, as the president, great leadership there. Doug DeVault took over for Cecil, who was a legend, as the commissioner, and Doug has done a tremendous job. And I got to tip my hat to Doug during the pandemic. I mean, if you knew the number of officials that opted out and what he had to do to go from 3 to 2 last year just to get the games covered, he's done an unbelievable job. And he doesn't ask for any accolades, but he's really done a tremendous job. And then on top of it, you've got Scott Bach-Hansen, and Scott is in fact the director of our camp. Irv Green, of course, does the non-varsity training, but Carl Armstrong did a terrific job in his role, but Scott has just put that on steroids. We are promoting and pushing young people. We're doing the formal STEP program in the summer where everything's filmed and everything's taped, and you can watch any of the games that you work. And I think the only way for you to improve on a consistent basis is by watching yourself, because you'll do things that you never imagined that you do, even if people tell you. But when you watch it, you can make those changes, help yourself to get better, look more confident, look more convincing, and sometimes just actually look better in terms of your run and your approach to the game. Mm-hmm. So all of that, I think, is a tribute to Cardinal. And then the icing on the cake with our local association is the fellowship with the people. But the I want to grasp for the formal title, but we actually have a ministry program, and that we got 400 officials in our association. Things happen with families, they happen with marriages, they happen with to our members, and we have a response team. All are pastors, and one is a priest, Chris Vaccaro, and they
Oh,
respond.
Chris the Priest. I didn't know that.
Scott is one of those, and it's a phenomenal tool. It is unbelievable, and I think it binds and it bonds the association to its members. Sometimes I don't think people recognize how different and how important. They understand how important it is, but they don't understand how different Cardinal is from the vast majority of local associations. And Gary Hall used to coach at Herndon, just wrote to Scott not too long ago and said, I hope that the coaches in Northern Virginia get some perspective on what a quality organization Cardinal is, because all you have to see is the alternative to know exactly what you're getting on a nightly basis, which I thought was appreciative, because Gary was not exactly a close friend of a lot of officials, and he had a tendency to be difficult to deal with from time to time. But I respect and appreciate the fact that he wrote that, and he was very sincere in his remarks. And I do believe Cardinal is really a quality organization.
Yeah, it's interesting you mentioned that outreach. I didn't know that existed, and the organization really has grown and matured. And I guess we should pay our respects to Joe Salsetti's family and Bill Naylor's family, guys that I work with, and great guys. But I noticed on Facebook you guys had such a big level of support for their funeral, or their ceremonies. It's something I didn't think about much. When I officiated, and I got out in 2005. You worked your games, and there was definitely relationships amongst the officials, and you went to Bryant's. And to me, that was the extent of it. It seems like it's gone much further in the last 15 years in terms of the level of support provided to the members.
I think it has. I really do, and I think that is again due in great part credit to the leadership and also to the members who have responded to it. But I mean, when you're involved in a personal tragedy, or you're involved in a very difficult situation. I mean, you have a divorce, you've got kids that get hurt, and you lose kids. Those are the types of things that the organization rallying around you creates a bond that really is inextricable. I mean, it's important. It's important to everyone who's associated with the organization. But you're right, with Bill and Joe. I mean, two of our elder statesmen passing in the last month. The turnout of 40-some people to Bill's at Friday in the summer vacation time, 1:00 in the afternoon, and then Joe last Thursday at 3:00 in the afternoon. Again, moving into the holiday weekend, there was over 50 officials dressed in their jackets who attended, and that was Joe and Bill's request. Both of them wanted the officials to wear their jackets to identify them as something that they really cared about and they really loved and meant a great deal to them, which I thought was just terrific.
Yeah. Did we? I mentioned this. I sent you this question earlier, and I think with any advocation that you do, not involving your job, your profession, there is ability to go overboard and do it too much. Do you guys get involved in issues where maybe an official is spending too much time away from their families? Because I got out of officiating. One of the reasons why was I had my second child, and it was just too many nights away from home, and so I prefer to do other things. But anyway, is that something you guys have to address at times?
Julian, again, 32 years as an active official, another 13 as an observer, being around officials and around what goes on, and then observing, with the close friends I still have in the college game, what goes on. They're people that mess up their lives and create problems for themselves every year. And it's unfortunate, because what you do is you get your priorities reversed. And I think one of the things that's a real danger right now, and I'm not being prejudiced about the money that's being paid to the college officials at this point in time, which I didn't get paid. But the bottom line is that I think it's a lure, and I think it tends to make people, when you recognize that you can make 4.5 months, you can make a couple $100,000 a year doing something as an avocation, it becomes something that's more important than an avocation. And when you lose your priorities, you lose your priority of faith first and family, and then your work, and then your avocation. When those things get messed up, I've seen it happen to a lot of people, and it's a shame, but it's one of those things that hopefully you have somebody to give you perspective and say, listen, you're messing things up. Don't mess up your family life to go referee a game. I don't care what you think it's going to pay you down the line. But yes, it's unfortunate, but it has happened, and it has happened, unfortunately, with some consistency. Fortunately, most people keep that perspective. But I tell you what, it's tough when you consider these guys they're going over to George Mason. And I don't know whether you're aware of it, but there's guys, if you're involved in Division I tournaments at the end of the year, you're involved in the NCAA tournament, these guys are making 4,000 plus for a game. And you think about working 80 games. I mean, it doesn't take a rocket scientist to figure out gross receipts are up there above, certainly, maybe not the 1% that we talk about, but they're right up there at the top edge of the earning incomes in America. And again, that's for 4.5 months worth of work.
Yeah, it's great money. You talked about this a little bit earlier. During the pandemic, we had to go back to some two-man crews. When I officiated, most of my officiating was done. I guess I was like half and half. I guess they changed over at some point. I went from two to being part of a three-man crew.
Right.
Were you able to get good officiating out of two-man crews? I've always felt the idea I'd rather have two great officials than a good official and two mediocre officials. But I know there are other reasons for three-man crew, because you can bring young folks in earlier and get them experience at a high level with other good officials. You get better court coverage, of course. You keep older officials into the game. They can't move as they may have once been able to. But with three-man crew, they have a lot less ground to cover. So what do you think about 2 versus 3?
You know what? Let me put it this way: a three-person game. Officiated well, there isn't any comparison. You can't with the speed and the strength and the way that the game moves now, especially the play around the rim. That's kind of the main differentiation. I know you'd asked me about the boys and the girls games, and that's the main difference in the boys and the girls games. The boys games played up around the rim. There's a whole different dimension to officiating that. And you know exactly what I'm talking about. The women's game has advanced so much. And there are really tough women's games, but the difference is, for the most part, they don't play around the rim. So I would say always an effectively worked three-man game is it's just a better way to see the game. And I think you have a tendency certainly to miss less. You'd like to have it divided with all three guys, and guys or girls. But the key is I know what you're saying about two outstanding officials working in a game. They can handle that. But that's also exclusionary. You're talking about, you're going to hand pick two guys to work a game. Well, that's fine. You hand pick three good guys to work a game. It should be just that much better. And I believe in the three-man system. I mean, I came up during a two-man, worked all 3 state games, the state finals that I had, worked two-man. But I work with great partners, and we had good games. But as I look back, boy, it would have been great to have 3. It was unbelievable. I worked with Jimmy Jones, my first one. In 84, and we worked at U-Haul and had Jefferson Huguenot with against Pulaski County. And the previous night, a kid named Michael Porter had just torched Mount Vernon. I mean, he had just absolutely taken him. I think he ended up going to St. John's, and then he wound up back at Virginia Tech. But that night, JHW was just too much for him. They had Peter Woolfolk, who I think ended up going to Richmond, just a big 6'5" kid in the middle, and you couldn't get around him or through him. And they beat Pulaski pretty handily. I think they wore themselves out the previous night against Mount Vernon. But I work with Jimmy Jones, who's one of the all-time greats in Virginia, and Jimmy's a dear friend. He's been a great mentor to me, and that's an interesting story, if I can share it, about Jimmy in the locker room with the first state championship. Jimmy probably had 9 state finals and worked 15 to 18 state tournaments. We go and sit in the locker room, and at that time, there was a transition going on in the game with the camp system, new supervisors on the college level, and I'd been exposed to Fred Barakat, and we were all doing thorough and extensive pre-games. Well, Jimmy came from the old school. Well, I walk in, and he's the vet, and he looked at me and said, "How you doing?" And we had a little chit-chat and had conversation. He says, "Why don't you do the pre-game?" I said, "Jimmy, come on." I said, "You've been doing," he said, "Steve," he says, "I want us to be prepared the best way we know how." He says, "You do the pregame. I know you do an extensive pregame, and we'll be prepared and ready, and we'll give our best effort." I've never forgotten that as long as I live. I've shared that at some camp situations, that story. But that's part of the reason that I respect and care about Jimmy, as much as I do, in making a young guy feel comfortable in his first state final. And we went out and had a great game. So that was terrific. Then I worked with my dear friend from the ACC, Larry Rose, who established a relationship over the next 25 years. It was our first game together. We worked Booker T in Petersburg over at the Convocation Center at JMU in 86. Double overtime. I couldn't tell you a single player in the game, but all I know is we ran and we ran and we ran, and it was just an outstanding game, played at a high level, played at an intense level. And I'm still not sure to this day that it's not one of the best games that I've ever officiated. And Larry and I just felt like we were in tune. We were on top of things the entire night, but what a great game. And then the following year I came back, worked at the University of Richmond, my alma mater, and had Coach McCaig and Robinson play against Alonzo Mourning and Indian River. And I worked with Harold Dean, his son, of course, the same name, would become a great star at UVA. Harold was a wonderful guy, very, very warm guy, worked at Virginia State University, and we got along great. But I talked to Coach McCaig after, I guess, several years after that. And he said, Steve, the only thing we were lacking was brass knuckles and nunchucks to try and stop Mourning, because we couldn't stop him any other way.
Yeah. Well, a funny story about that game. So, I went to Robinson. And
Yep.
Sean Johnson was Robinson's star point guard, and he ended up going to Virginia State. He played for Coach Dean, Harold Dean, and Robinson felt that Coach Dean called a couple fouls on Paul Bushman and was protecting Alonzo. This is from a very biased point of view of Sean Johnson, and so he used to tease Coach Dean. Says, it's not like he was going to go to Virginia State. You weren't going to recruit this guy. Why are you trying to help him beat us? So they used to tease him about it all the time.
That's funny. That is funny. Oh,
yeah. So
unbelievable.
So, you started doing big ACC games as well. And did you find you got as nervous for a Maryland Virginia game as you would get for a TC Woodson game? Nervous is not the right word. Would you get the same kind of energy and the same kind of anxiousness that you would get? So on a Friday high school game, is it as exciting as a Saturday afternoon game in an ACC?
Well, I think once again, I went through stages in my career. I sort of built up a base, ended up working some top flight high school games and games that were very, very competitive. And I was amped up and ready to work in those games. But yes, when I went to the college level, the nice part about what happened in transition with the ACC was, we went to a camp in '82. Fred Barricat was a coach at Fairfield University. He took over for Norval Neve, who had been the supervisor of officials in the ACC for many, many years. Norval gave the job up. Fred interviewed and got the job. Well, here's a coach coming in to coach officials, and it's a completely different situation. But he looked at the roster, and he told the story many times. Fred since passed, but I worked for him for 22 years. So, we had a long-standing and a very good relationship. But he said he looked at the staff that was presented to him, and he looked at a list, and he said there was 80 to 100 guys. Then he looked at the assignments, and there were 40 guys working all the games. He said, we're not going to continue this way. So he affiliated himself with Howie Garfinkel and a 5-star basketball camp in the summer at Robert Morris College. And basically the first year was an invitation camp. And so I was fortunate enough to get invited, probably because of the relationship I had at that time with Joe Forte, who was a top official in the ACC, who recommended a certain number of people. I think he went to his top guys. And in addition to those people that he saw on the staff who weren't working games, he brought us in. And I believe it was, I think there was 56 guys came to that initial camp. And there was only 4 guys added to the staff. I was not one of them. But 2 years later, I was fortunate enough, because of that initial relationship, to be added to the ACC staff in '84 and then worked till 2006. But what Fred did was Fred put us on intersectional games and games that were outside of the eye, because the ACC's scope was so that people who, a perfect example would be Jerry Tarkanian. When UNLV had all those great teams, I wasn't even working league games in the ACC, but he would send us out to work Stacey King and Mookie Blaylock in Oklahoma against UNLV when UNLV was going for the national championship. And he'd put a young crew on it. Now, he might put a senior guy and then 2 young guys. But you talk about cutting your teeth. When Mike Tyson walks up on the Gucci row and you sit and you look at him and you're standing 2 feet away from him, that's intimidating. Tarkanian wasn't intimidating, but Mike Tyson was. And it was just one of those things where it was a nice place to cut your teeth on really tough, difficult games. Intersectional games at the grade 8 at the beginning of the year. I had Kentucky and UMass when Marcus Canby, they had Travieso and Carlos Padilla playing guard, and Marcus Canby, Kentucky was 1 and UMass was number 2. And we had that game, and Canby went off. I said to this day, made himself more money than he could have ever imagined, scoring 32 points and 8 rebounds against Kentucky and upsetting them to take the number 1 position in the country. But I was a young official at that time. Those are tough games with a lot of intensity, and worked a lot of games out there, Kansas and Cincinnati. It just, I mean, when teams were top 5 teams, but it didn't have the same pressure as any ACC league games. So when you went back and worked the league games in the ACC, yes, you were amped up. And of course, you were always amped up for Duke, Carolina. And I was fortunate to work half a dozen of those games. And I can't even describe to you. Fred used to describe the way that he assigned at the beginning of the year. He would start with the March 3rd, 2nd, 3rd, 4th game with Duke and Carolina, normally at Duke. That's where he started assigning on that game. So if you were on that game, you were doing okay. And you figured you were probably going to have a pretty decent schedule. But he worked backwards from that game. So you knew anytime you worked that game that you'd achieve something. So I felt very good about having worked that game. And there were some intense rivalries. It was always, there's so many great venues, in 90, I worked the only time Clemson has won the ACC championship, they tied. And they had Duke come in the Wednesday night prior to the end of the season. And they beat Duke 97-93. And they said that the fire marshal, fortunately, he was in the building, because had he come in with the crowd that was there, he would have shut it down. They had people sitting in the aisles, the baseline, sidelines, everything was jammed. I mean, you couldn't get in the place at Little John Coliseum. And it was one of the great games I ever worked. And I worked with 2 of my dear friends, Frank Scagliotta and Rick Hartzell, who are still dear friends today.
So when you work games with iconic billionaires like these, they weren't billionaires back then, but they're guys like John Thompson, Mike Krzyzewski, Terry Holland. These guys are big personalities, influential guys. And there's Steve Gordon. There's some guys, referee. No one cares about Steve Gordon. Can it be intimidating? I'm just kidding, Steve. We love you. But can it be intimidating trying to keep control of the game when you got these guys? They're working you. They want every advantage that they can get. They like, when this game's down at Georgia Tech, I'm getting home cooking down there. I want some home cooking when we're in Charlottesville. I mean, you have a lot of pressure from these guys. Is it intimidating?
Something. Let me just say this. I think what you kind of have to understand, and this was what Fred was really good at. As a matter of fact, my dad was really good at it. Never gave it a moniker to go by, but it's what I call the lead trail system. Now, in 3-person, it's a little bit different because you got 3 guys instead of 2. But my father used to put a veteran official with a younger official on a lot of district games, tough games. Fred used to put a lead official with 2 younger guys on, first of all, non-conference games. You'd have a tournament. There'd be 4 teams, non-conference games early in November and December. They would see you at least twice before you came in to work league games. And so as a result, there was a certain acceptance there. Was it intimidating to begin with? I think it was one of those things where you just really grabbed yourself and you had to focus and concentrate so much on the play on the floor that if there's one thing that you compromised on, it was the amount of communication that you had with the coaches. As you relaxed more, obviously, that communication started to flow. Terry was always interesting at UVA because he always felt like Dave Odom was getting after you and Terry was watching the game. I mean, it was amazing. And then what you'd see is you see Dave go over to Terry and kind of whisper in his ear. And the next time down, he'd say, Steve, that down there at the other yeah. He'd start to get on you about a play. That wasn't a block down there, Steve. Come on. And it was just like Dave was filtering information. Of course, then he became, a heck of a coach at Wake Forest, in his own right. And Terry obviously retired, but it just, there were just so many great environments and great games. U-Haul was a great place. I loved Cole Fieldhouse, Little John at Clemson, special place to work. I mean, no question about it. The Joel Center at Wake was a great place. Reynolds Coliseum was a hotbed, one of the strangest shaped arenas I've ever seen. It was like a cigar. I mean, you were very, very tight on the sides, and it just went on forever in the end zones.
Yeah.
I never could figure out anybody who had season tickets to the end zone, how they ever enjoyed the game because they were so far away. And of course, when it comes right down to it, then you had Carmichael, which I only worked in a couple times, and then the Dean Dome, and there isn't any better place to officiate a game than Cameron. It's just it's quite a place.
So what input do you think coaches should have in the evaluation of officials? So when I officiated in Charlottesville, I'm sure the coach would call Lou Ferrigno afterwards and say, "Look, this guy was okay. This guy was great." And I think that's pretty much how it's done. And the other official would have input as well that you worked with. Now, when I was at Cardinal, it was almost completely the opposite. Coaches had very little input except for I guess they could a certain number of scratches they could get. You were completely evaluated by your partners, or I think at some point there might have been a rating committee. What is the most effective way to get coaches' input into the type of officials that are out there?
You know what? It means I think it's a great point, and I think there's room for a lot of discussion and a lot of flex in that, because I do believe the guys that officiate, your lead officials, coming in to watch guys work junior varsity games and giving critiques. I do think it's important for peers to critique you, but I also think it's important to get input from coaches, because a consistent input from a coach is a trend, and that's something I think you need to address. So by not getting that or not allowing that, I think you create a problem. I think we have a nice balance on the local level. It's not necessarily advertised, and I don't know that it's encouraged to say, yes, your word means more than somebody else when you talk about coaches, but I think their input is always acknowledged. And it's one of those things that, again, you may not determine who's coming to your gym, but if you really feel strongly about one guy out of 110 that are officiating, you can convey that, and I think it's acknowledged. So I think it's important to get that blend of feedback, and I think that's what we try and do on a local level for sure.
When you go watch a person officiate, can you tell whether they have potential, or do you believe everyone who works hard and wants to do it can be trained to be a good official?
I think there are different levels for different people, and let me give you a perfect example. We've got a young man now in our association. He's been working 3 years. He played for Bob Huggins at West Virginia. His name is Eric Dickerson, and Eric is 6'5". He's cut, shredded. He runs like a deer, and he has the right attitude and approach. He's very low key in terms of what he does. He's not trying to bowl anybody over, but by the same token, you can't help but look in his direction. You can't help but watch him when he officiates. He's a special situation. Eric is either going to be in the NBA or he's going to be working division college ball. And I don't want him to hear this, because his timetable is not the timetable that's going to be set for him. It's going to be whatever those in the powers that be determine his speed of moving up the ladder can be. But he was just added to a couple Division III and Division II leagues, and he's worked 3 years. But again, he's an exception. When you talk about the everyday person that's coming along, there are always attributes and things that you can do to improve your officiating. And I think observations by multiple people, you look for consistency, you look for similarities, you look for the things that they say you can do to improve. And then again, with a program like we have with the summer, we have a certain number of people who want to move up the ladder. We put them in the summer program, see whether they can handle it. And we give, for the most part, accurate feedback. Some people are not happy about the feedback they get. Everybody can get better, but I'm not going to say that everybody can be sometimes a varsity official, sometimes, a Division III official. I mean, I think there are limitations. And I think you figure that out after a period of time, certainly if you get the right kind of consistent and good feedback.
Well, one thing that Cardinal was a trailblazer with is we had women doing games boys games, big games early. I mean, it was the first that I known around a big time high school basketball where I saw women refereeing boys games. Jackie Funk, Linda Herf, Joyce Sisson. It's something that we saw all the time. We got used to it. Adam's wife, Chrissy, when I was officiating, was all great officials.
Yep.
How important do you think it is to have women doing men's games? Part of me thinks that it's also when I was at Robinson, I had this teacher named Mr. Singletary. He was a black guy. He was a great guy, and he was the only black teacher in the building. I think non-PE at the time. And it was great for the white students to have a black teacher. It was great because it was very rare in the late 1970s. But it would have also been great to have Mr. Singletary in the inner city teaching black students who need a male role model. Both points are valid. How important do you think it is to have women doing boys games and not doing girls games? And generally, what's your philosophy on who should do what?
I think it's absolutely critical. And you just mentioned the real trailblazer in our association, despite the fact that you mentioned some great officials. I mean, Linda and Joyce and Chrissy, all friends of mine and outstanding officials, could work pretty much any boys game, no question about it. And I think if you want to, and you have the ability, there shouldn't be any limitations whatsoever. But Jackie was the blockbuster. I thought about it in looking at the comments that you had made. I went through and I said, look, Jackie Brooklyn, when Jackie's the referee in a AAA state final, that the mold's been broken. And right. I hope that we'll continue, to get qualified women who want to get there and want to do better and want to put in the work, to be able to do that. But each of those people that you mentioned put in a tremendous amount of work to achieve what they achieved. And Jackie certainly was no exception. Great official. I wish we could get her back, even from an observation standpoint. She's very, very busy with her family, and we appreciate that. But first of all, she's a terrific person. But secondly, she would contribute so much to observing, especially, not exclusively, but especially, the women officials who want to continue to improve. We've got some work in college ball in our local association now. I feel like if they want to, they should be able to work anything. And I think you also need to look, Julian, at the NBA. The NBA is, they're trailblazers in so many things. If you watched any of the summer league, you saw at least 7 or 8 women working those summer league games for the NBA teams. They are trying, to I would say push, but probably create opportunities for women officials in the NBA because they think it's important. And I do too.
I had a guy give me advice one time that, Julian, don't let anyone ever talk you into doing college basketball. What's going to happen to you is you end up traveling 80 miles, 100 miles to some Division III game, and the gym is going to be empty. Stick to the high school ball because you'll have fun games, you'll do great games, and it's easier to fit into your lifestyle. What do you think about that person's advice to me?
Something, and maybe I'm going to get in a little bit of trouble for saying this, but you get a guy like Greg Bennett who handles the ODAC. Greg's a dear friend of mine. Greg is a consummate pro. He rewards people. He has an attention to detail. He doesn't want to send people arbitrarily 3.5, 4.5 hours away. He tries to use the people that he thinks are the best, but also give opportunities to young people. He does things the right way. There are other Division II and Division III supervisors in the country that don't care a lick about the guys that are working for him. And when you think about what you can do working a varsity high school game, and oh, by the way, if you work a combination freshman varsity or a combination JV varsity or a combination girls varsity, boys varsity, you can make the same amount driving 20 minutes away from your house that you can driving 4 hours to work a Division III game and then work the game and come back. And you basically have dedicated about 10 to 12 hours and you get paid exactly the same thing, whether you drove 20 minutes to work a local high school doubleheader or went down and worked a Division III game. And I know there's, for a lot of guys, it's a reputation thing. It's definitely they feel like that is a prestige thing. So I can appreciate it, but there's good and there's bad on that level. And I think it's important to differentiate, which is which.
Yeah, you mentioned earlier one of the reasons why you prefer three-man crew, or three-man crew is better to state it more obviously, is that the game is over the rim and there's a lot going on. But one thing that is definitely true is the game has gotten less physical nowadays. Like in the early 90s, it was almost like the NBA was kind of filtering down. Like you watch the Pistons on TV or the Boston LA matchups. The game has gotten physical, and as a referee, you had to kind of choose what you're going to call. I mean, you couldn't call everything because the game was really physical. That really has gone away now. So in some measure, hasn't the game gotten in that regard a little bit easier to officiate now?
Well, yeah, unless you're working South County Lake Braddock, and then it's racehorse basketball that's physical, it's fast, it's played up around the rim, and I'm just using those two as an example.
Yeah,
but
sure.
they've had quite a rivalry here for the last 4, 5, 6 years, and there've been some great games that I've observed, because I normally observe at South County. It's only about 3.5 miles from my house, so I kind of let the officials come through South County rather than try and bounce around to different gyms and go to see them, because what ends up happening is I see a lot of the same officials. With the respect that I have for Doug and the way that he moves assignments around, if I stay watching both boys and girls basketball at South County, I see a heck of a lot of different officials throughout the year, which I feel like it kind of goes further for me in terms of observing to see more officials. But I think the game has cleaned up, and I think it's good. It's better for it, no question about it. Those knockdown drag out games are just, first of all, they're so tough, but the second thing is it's not a great game to watch.
Yeah. So I'm gonna put a little bit of pressure on you, but you got to easy out on this one. I'm not going to ask you to name the best official that you work with, but could you name someone who's unsung, someone that you thought was underrated, and someone that always did a great job that maybe didn't get the respect or maybe the games that maybe that person could have deserved?
No question about it. During my time, there's a guy in Richmond, Chuck Pitts, one of the best ball and strike officials. I'm talking about, fouls and violations. He'd get it all right. We often said you could light a cherry bomb and put it up his backside and he wouldn't budge. Chuck was just nonplussed. He had not necessarily a great game with Fred Barakat in the stands. And then he made a bad decision. He was invited to dinner and he decided not to go. And at that time, Fred was quite a powerful, self-consumed guy. And when he turned him down, it turned his career. And I always felt like it was unfortunate. Now, Chuck worked everywhere else, but he didn't necessarily work for Fred in the ACC and work big games from that point on. And I always felt bad for him for that. Now, that may not be fair, but it's true. And the other two guys, and one's working right now. One is a big time official. In fact, he's at the end of his career, but that didn't get a shot for probably 6-7 years before I thought he should have, and that's Jamie Luckey. Jamie is probably the most hated official in America now, certainly in the ACC. But Jamie's a great official and a great guy, and he was very late to the party. I mean, he was doing exactly what he did for the last 15 years when he's been so big time for the previous 10, and he didn't get an opportunity. But the other guy who is a great caller of games is Tim Comer from the Valley.
Oh, I know Tim Comer. Buddy Comer's brother or son or
nephew.
Okay.
Nephew. Yeah. He's something. And Tim's a personal friend. So just to be candid and honest about it. But Timmy is a terrific official. Does a great job. Gets an opportunity to work ACC games. But I personally think that he's as good as anybody out there calling games. Now, he's bald. He's about 5'7" or 8. He's in great shape, but sometimes that impacts when you got a group of 6'2", 6'1", 180-pound Adonises, in a lineup, and there's Tim, and you say, well, who am I going to assign this game to? Unfortunately, I'm afraid a lot of times they go with the Adonis. And I just think I think those are two. And I will not dodge your question about the best ever, because in my humble opinion, Tim Higgins is the best I was ever around. Tim, and I said this, I was fortunate enough in the ACC about 10, 11, 12, maybe 12 or 13 years into my career to win the Commissioner's Award. And when I gave my acceptance speech, which we were fortunate to do, Timmy was in the audience. And I said, Tim Higgins, more than any referee I've ever been around, knows what to call and what not to call. He knows when to call it and when not to call it. And he knows what to say and what not to say, and when to say it and when not to say it. And I said, the amazing thing about Higgs is, in addition to being a great official, looking like Barney Rubble and talking out of the side of his mouth, he is not your conventional, classic official that you think of. But I said, every time I'm with him, when I leave and we part ways, I feel better about myself and my condition than I did before I saw him. He's an amazing guy, and is simply my favorite. My favorite personal relationship is Rick Hartzell, because we worked so many games for so many years together. One year we worked 28 games together. We could finish each other's sentences, and we started to shower for each other. I mean, it just was, it was crazy. I mean, we just absolutely. Now, Rick is a dear friend of mine, and the relationships that I cultivated during my years are the most valuable thing that I have still to this day. Forget about the games, forget about the money we earned. That was all great, but the relationships are special. Still maintain a great relationship with Brian Kersey, Ramey Steins, Roger Ayers, Zelton Steed. I mean, Mike Eads. I mean, a lot of guys that are terrific officials or were terrific officials. But Rick Hartzell and Frank Scagliotta are probably two of my closest friends. And Rick is also my youngest son's godfather. So it lets you know about the relationships you established over many, many years.
Yeah. Well, we didn't talk much about the NBA because you didn't officiate the NBA, but the NBA has spent a lot of money of trying to get biases out of officiating, not just biases, not race or those kind of things, the biases in terms of maybe the home court advantage or what are officials doing, what calls are they missing? And they did a lot of data analysis on that. What do you feel about that in terms of officiating? Do you think that's a good way to improve the officiating that we see?
You know what I think, and I would never question what the NBA is doing, because I know there's a lot of study, there's a lot of data, there's a lot of research that goes into it. Personally, I'm not positive. I just don't know that that we have to get that deep in the woods. Maybe we do, but that wouldn't be my way to go about it. I mean, I think in teaching and I think in observing, you have to give people, benefit of the doubt in terms of the way they come to the gym, what they're looking to do. And my greatest pride as an official, and you certainly did it when you officiated, is that you walk into the gym and you're working a 3-person crew, is you are the only 3 people in that gym who don't care who wins. And I've always worn that like a badge of honor. I think that's the most amazing thing and a most awesome responsibility that you can have, is everybody in there wants somebody to win, and they want favor for them. Coaches are the same with their players. They put in so much time with their players. They put in so much effort with their assistant coaches, and you appreciate the fact they want calls to go their way. But you got to be straight down the line. You got to protect the visitors, especially on a college level, because that 6 to 8 point advantage or disadvantage that you have when you're home or away, you want to make sure the visitors get a great shot. They get their best shot. Now, that doesn't mean you bend over backwards and help them, but it's just you want to make sure that they get a fair shot. And I think if you do that, I think you give them the best that you can give them.
Yeah. What is the last question? What is and this has been great. I appreciate all your time, Steve. What's next in officiating? What do you think the next frontier is to continue to improve officiating, or to continue to attract better potential candidates to officiate in the first place?
I think you hit the nail on the head. I think we're doing a good job. I think we can always do better. And I think one of the things we need to do, and I've talked till I was blue in the face about this for years, Julian. I think we need to go to the high school ranks, and we need to go to the college ranks, and we need to recruit. what we talked about, and I'm not saying that it should be the central focus, but the money that can be gained, the money that can be earned. When you talk about, I gave you the example of young Dickerson, in our local association, played for Bobby at West Virginia. He shows up. You can't look away from him when he's officiating. I mean, he's just a stud. That's all there is to it. Now, he's got to improve a lot of things in his officiating game, but he's got you looking at him right off the bat. And that's a great place to go. Well, athletes who run like athletes, who act like athletes, are attractive in the game because the players are all athletes. The coaches are former athletes. They wouldn't be there if they're not. And I just think we need to recruit from high schools and colleges people. We need to actively do it. We need to get after it. And we need to get kids who love the game, play the game, and understand the game. I think it gives them a head start in terms of how successful they can be officiating wise.
Yeah. Well, Steve, that's a great answer. And this has been great. I haven't seen you in a while. I remember you on the courts. I remember watching you on TV, and you and Joe Forte and a couple other guys I always mention as local guys who did these big games. But it's been great talking to you, and also it's been great getting to know you on the Facebook group. Really appreciate all your contribution, because you're a wealth of basketball knowledge, not just about officiating, but because you played in Northern Virginia, and you refereed in the ACC. You've seen a lot of great basketball, played a lot of great basketball in your life.
Well, Julian, let me just say this. I really appreciate your investment in the game, and I appreciate what you're doing. We can't ever forget that the coaches and players are what the game's all about. But sometimes I think that officials are given short shrift, because I think we've had an advancement and a development in the game in terms of trying to improve our games and working. One of the things I think sometimes the coaches forget is when they see us in the summer, it's almost like a shock and a surprise to them that we're working on our games much like they are out of season. I think it's one of the big steps that was taken on the college level, was having the top officials critique younger officials at camps, the Nike All-American, the Adidas camps, and these top flight coaches. And you mentioned them, Krzyzewski, Boeheim. You talk about all the big time coaches are out, Calipari's out, and they come around in the summer and they see us working on our game, critiquing younger officials and spending time improving. This helps. And I really appreciate the fact that you're doing something really positive. Appreciate you letting an old official come back and give a few opinions and share some of the experiences that I've had. So I want to thank you, and I do appreciate it very much.
Well, you're welcome. You actually, I thought, being the KG official that you are, you would dodge a lot of questions. You answered everything. And that actually surprised me. I thought you were going to try to appear neutral.
Oh, it'll get me in trouble somewhere.
I'm sure. Well, it'll be great to listen to. I can't wait to listen back. And again, this is great. And I hope when this pandemic is done for good, hopefully we can get some folks together and have a beer and actually meet in person or see each other in person again.
Would look forward to doing that.
Yeah, great. Okay, Steve. Well, look, thanks again, and be in touch.
Julian, thanks so much. Have a great day.
You too, buddy.
Take care.
You too.